Another dude who I'm pretty sure likes a bit of the Lord of the Rings is Stephen Adams. And first of all, he's playing pretty well at the moment. He strung together 5 games of 20 plus minutes, then took a game off, and then played 12 minutes. But also, Houston Rockets are winning a few games. But we got a bit of the Wayne Bennett curse with Stephen Adams. Wayne Bennett, good coach, comes in, changes your franchise, changes your club. Then he leaves, your club becomes shit. That's just how Wayne Bennett and the NRL operate. Stephen Adams comes through. The only team that didn't get worse was the Oklahoma City Thunder, so shout out to them. But he
Well, they
goes
got
to
worse at first, but they kind of got worse deliberately. Like that's why they traded him, is because they're like, well, he's too good for us to be as bad as we want to be. And now they're amazing again because they went on the full, they committed to the roller coaster.
goes to New Orleans Pelicans. He leaves there. Some shit happens with their star player. They just become like a nothing NBA team. Goes to Memphis Grizzlies, helps them, cultural leader. He's trying to keep them together through their own little dramas that they've got, American dramas with the old gunfinger salutes and all that stuff happening. He leaves the Memphis Grizzlies, and now they've fired their coach, and he's in a better situation at the Houston Rockets. So I think it's a certainty right now that if you move on from Stephen Adams, you need to expect that you'll get worse. Like that's just how it is. Undeniable at this point.
It's part and parcel of being one of the most underrated players for the value that he brings to a team. As everyone at the Grizzlies were talking constantly about like such a great dude. He's always helping out. He's taught us so much, and he does the one percenters and all the stuff, the screens, the offensive rebounding. They talk about how great his impact is, and then they traded him. And the funniest part about it is they traded him, and then in the draft they picked Zach Edey, who was the closest thing to Stephen Adams in that draft available. So it's like, why didn't you just keep Stephen Adams? Why are you doing this? But it probably worked out for the better because he's ended up on a Houston Rockets team, which feels like it's built in the same way as the Memphis Grizzlies were built, except with a better coach and more engaged star players and stronger senior leadership around, like other than Stephen Adams. Things that Memphis Grizzlies obviously lacked. And I'm a little bit surprised that Taylor Jenkins lasted as long as he did. People were surprised at the firing. I thought maybe the firing would have come sooner because it seemed to me quite obvious that he as a coach had not at the risk of sounding too much like a businessman here, like had not maximized their potential, and a lot of that was you had Stephen Adams. You had a guy like that who's been on winning teams wherever he goes, who does things which sure they don't show up as like points, rebound. Well, he gets the rebounds, but he gets some assists for his position as well. But he's not going to be out there being a top scorer or anything. And yet, it's a known thing that offensive rebounds and screens and stuff like this will make those are winning plays that help you get, they help you score more points than your opponents. They help you win basketball games. And I don't know, even at the Houston Rockets, it doesn't feel like that's fully appreciated. But that might just be a situation of like, we're starting to get there a bit more. They got Alperen Sengun, and he's awesome. So you can't give Stephen Adams 30 minutes a night or anything like that. You probably shouldn't be anyway after he's missed 2 years of basketball with a bad knee. So it's probably the low-key nature of the season he's having is probably the best thing for the rest of his career in terms of just ramping him up to continue on in the NBA for the next few years. But we are starting to see that double big formation a whole lot more. And we are, like you said, we're starting to see him, because they're able to balance him with Sengun, he's pushing up more around that 20-minute mark. And I still think when the playoffs come around, we're going to see a pretty impactful, pretty important Stephen Adams figure in that Houston Rockets team. At least I hope so. I might be clouded by my own bias, but it seems like we're pointing in that direction.
I mean, the whole podcast is our Aotearoa bias, so no need to
Yeah,
highlight that there. Bring it back closer to home in the local basketball scene, New Zealand NBL. We've got 4 teams who have had 1 loss. Tauranga 5, Franklin Bulls, they're 4-1. Canterbury Rams, Taranaki Airs are 3-1. I did catch a bit of the Canterbury game where they were winning. It was good. And then the team that's gone back to back with New Zealand NBL championships, they empty their bench for the last like 40 seconds. And they've got a couple of 17-year-olds. They're joking in commentary like all these dudes are going to be at school tomorrow. I'm like, that's not only the story of New Zealand sport, but it's also the story of the Canterbury Rams and the Canterbury region with the amount of talent they are producing. Like the best team that's just gone back to back with like legends, Taylor Britt, Max Darling. I do like that Isaac dude, Kaya Isaac.
which one? By Isaac, yeah. Tama Isaac, both brothers.
They're getting a lot of game time. They're doing some great stuff. And that's Canterbury basketball. So shout out to Canterbury basketball. You've mentioned Carlin Davison before. Taranaki is a 4th with that 3-1 record. Carlin Davison shooting 52% from the 3-point line. And that's it. Like that's the thing you've highlighted throughout the season. If Carlin Davison's shooting 3-pointers, then he might be taking a big leap forward. And is he still around the Breakers with the change in ownership that's just happened? And most importantly, a change but a return to the most logical way to build a New Zealand sporting franchise, where you're developing local talent, you're connecting to the community, and it's all about basketball in New Zealand. So thank you to whoever the fuck was the previous owners for making us appreciate how to properly run a New Zealand sporting franchise. Because the new owners, they've gone straight back into the Breakers dynasty ways of connection to the community, celebrating Kiwi basketball, and they seem like they are going to do similar investments to the Warriors, the Wellington Phoenix, Auckland FC, in how they develop talent. But my question, though, is about Davison. Is Davison still around the Breakers? Is he going to be with the Breakers next season? Does he have that opportunity ahead of him?
He certainly does. The Breakers, I think, have 6 players under contract, like from last year, for their full roster, plus all their development players, I think, had signed new deals or first deals last year, and they were all like 1+1 type deals. So the DPs, that's Alex McNaught, that's Kaya Isaac, that's Carlin Davison. They're all probably coming back as development players on top of who are the 6 players that they had? Wrote it down somewhere, but I can't remember. They should be back as development players. But I was writing about this in the newsletter yesterday. I did float out the idea of like, well, Carlin Davison's been that good to start the New Zealand NBL, and also I thought did really well in the limited opportunities, but increasing opportunities that he got towards the end of last season. New ownership have said they'll honor all the contracts that they inherited, by the way, as far as the playing stuff. They've got rid of all 7 of the full-time staff outside of the basketball team, but they're going to keep the basketball structures that they had. Like the players who are under contract are going to stay, the coach is going to stay, which is fair enough, even though a couple of the players that are under contracts probably shouldn't have been signed in the first place. So it might be a possibility to wrangle out a 1 or 2 of those. We'll see what happens. But as far as Carlin Davison goes, I did float out the idea when I was going through in the newsletter all the different, just the situations of all the players the New Zealanders who played in the Aussie NBL last season and where they are currently with their contracts. So they float out the idea of like, yeah, he's pretty much guaranteed to be back as a development player, but maybe he's doing well enough. He's shown enough progress that you actually, like they did with Max Darling at the same time last season, elevate him to a full roster spot and say, like, you're actually better than a development player now. So I wrote that down as a theory in the newsletter, published the newsletter, jumped on Twitter, And then Olgun Olich was tweeting about stuff and said, by the way, Carlin Davison has had his contract upgraded. So his next year is going to be a full roster contract. So I maybe should have checked that before I pressed publish, and then I could have written it as a confirmed thing. But it has happened. I checked the theory out, and then I won't say I spoke it into existence because it had actually slightly already happened when I typed that, but it did happen.
Are there any other, maybe any NBL wrinkles that you're tracking as far as Australian NBL opportunities opening up for the lads playing in Aotearoa right now?
Well, from a club perspective, I know you're probably asking about players there, but from a club perspective, there's a pretty big opportunity that's opened up with the Breakers suddenly taking New Zealand basketball seriously again. So, like, that is actually a massive factor in the free agency period that's just starting. Is now players like, oh, I don't know, say let's use Flynn Cameron as an example. Had a he had a mutual option for his third and final year with the Melbourne United side, which means that I think either a party could opt out of it. And it sounds like, well, they don't say who opted out of it, but it sounds like it was probably Flynn Cameron's decision to opt out of it and will not be returning to Melbourne United. And my suspicion is that that would have something to do with the fact that Shea Ili and Matthew Dellavedova are ahead of him in the guard picking order. And he probably thinks correctly so, after in his coming into his third year in the NBL, he's worth a starting spot somewhere else. And he might be able to get a starting spot somewhere else, and that's hopefully what he's looking for. Well, Flynn Cameron was a gun coming out of college. Like, it was clear he was the best New Zealand prospect of that year. I can't remember if that's the same. I think it was the year after not Sam Meninga, the year after Sam Wardenberg, who's just re-signed with Cairns Taipans. Curiously, despite how bad Cairns were last season, he's opted in for another season. Flynn Cameron, it seemed a little bit pointed that he didn't even really seem to consider the Breakers as an option, and that was part of, like, Wardenberg was another one, a Kiwi coming out of college, didn't sign with the Breakers. Yanni Wetzel the year before him didn't sign with the Breakers, then did actually sign with the Breakers the next year after that, but it didn't happen the first time around. That might have more to do with the Breakers not investing in players. Like, they're not looking for New Zealand players. They're not going after those guys and saying these guys as Kiwis might add something a little bit extra to our team that they won't add to other teams, just because they didn't care about that. That was that era. But you also had instances of, like, the Webster brothers and Rob Lowe and Shea Ili, maybe most famously. Shea Ili actually has a what do you call it? Well, no, he doesn't have an option. He's actually a free agent. His contract's expired. So, but I think because Flynn Cameron's leaving, I think that's a pretty big hint that Shea Ili will re-sign with Melbourne United. Because if he was going to leave, surely Cameron stays and tries to get the spot that Ili would have left open for him. I think the fact that Cameron's opted out means that Ili will just re-sign with Melbourne. But he'll have interest from anywhere. He's the best defender in the competition. But he was another example, the first example, really, of Kiwi players deliberately leaving the Breakers during the last era. So hopefully that's changed now. Like, hopefully Dylan Boucher's on board. Maybe signing Dylan Boucher to be a president of basketball operations is maybe the most deliberate thing you could possibly do without saying it explicitly, that the next era is going to be not just different from the era that came before, but, like, they're going to do the exact opposite. Like, the things that Matt Walsh's Breakers weren't doing, the Mark Mitchell Breakers absolutely are going to do, starting with signing the general manager, who's just spent so long doing great work with ever since, in between his previous Breakers stint, with Basketball New Zealand, like specifically helping out at a time where basketball in New Zealand is probably the strongest it's been, and Dylan Boucher deserves credit for the way he's facilitated that. He obviously didn't start it, but he's supplied an environment where good Kiwi ballers have been able to come through and succeed in ways that they haven't done in previous eras. So that's fantastic. And obviously, Dylan Boucher was the general manager of the Breakers when the previous regime came in, and then he quit because, without saying it, it was pretty obvious he just didn't like the direction they were going. And, well, you hire him back, that's a pretty obvious, middle finger towards the direction of the previous owners. Even though Mitchell, the new owner fella, is carefully avoiding making that a direct thing. They've also brought the Black Whales are back in the directorship roles and minority invested roles sort of thing. The emphasis on building up an academy again, developing players in the breakers, like all these things are stuff that the Matt Walsh era team went against. Like he's not the new fella doesn't seem to want to say it outright, which is diplomatic of him. That's nice of him, but all his actions point towards this being a complete opposite of what happened before. So that's good, and that will create opportunities potentially now for players who have great relationships with Dylan Boucher through New Zealand basketball to actually want to play for the Breakers. And so top of that list clearly should be Flynn Cameron, right? Like he's probably the best New Zealander currently open as a free agent in this league, outside of guys like perhaps Yanni Wetzel, Finn Delaney, Isaac Fotu, who are playing overseas, who might want to come back. That's a possibility. I wouldn't bank on those things happening, but certainly I think the promise of a new era of Breakers is definitely a selling point for these free agents. And yeah, as far as I see it, the first thing they needed to do was upgrade that Carlin Davison contract, because that was just there waiting to happen. The next thing they should be doing is trying to sign Flynn Cameron.
I do well, first of all, it's always actions over words. So I don't care what you're saying or not saying.
That is true. That is true.
The actions always speak louder than the words, and the actions from the new ownership group are pretty loud. I also am
and the
aware...
words from the previous ownership group were pretty loud. The actions weren't, but the words were.
Well, the actions were loud.
Well, the actions were loud. They just did the opposite of what the word. Like there was a lot of promising. Yeah, we hear you. We're listening to what you're saying. We're going to do things better. We're going to bring that Kiwi core, and then they just didn't. Like they just didn't. They'd say one thing, and then it wouldn't happen.
Your point is valid, but their actions were also completely their actions spoke for themselves. So I literally don't care what you're saying, whether it's good or bad. It's all about what you do. The previous ownership group did things one way, regardless of what they're saying, and the new ownership group is doing things one way, regardless of what they're saying. And I'm also aware of this is good, I reckon, because we had a official collaboration between the Wellington Phoenix and New Zealand football a few months ago. The Warriors and New Zealand Rugby League are working a lot more. They're working together more these days than they had been previously. And now we're seeing greater crossover between New Zealand basketball and the New Zealand Breakers. And I think these are just good things for the sports, because in the cricket pipeline especially, we've seen how effective it can be when everyone's moving and grooving together.